Welcome to Be Well with Dr. Norcott. I'm your host, Dr. Candace Norcott. This is our second episode, and I'm so glad you're here. Each week on Be Well, we'll explore an issue and its implications for the mental well-being of you and your community. We'll also leave you with some tips and strategies you can use in your everyday life, tools rooted in the psychological theories I often use in my own practice. Be Well is not a replacement for your own therapy, but I hope it can be a conversation starter when your therapist asks, where would you like to begin? With that, let's unpack this week's topic. I'm ready for therapy, now what? Making the decision to go to therapy is a huge step, but for many, what follows next can feel overwhelming. How do you find a therapist that fits you? What kind of therapy is right for your needs? How do you even start the process, especially if cost, culture, or stigma have been barriers in the past? Today, we're talking about how to move from the decision to seek therapy to actually beginning the journey. Because here's the thing, starting therapy isn't just a logistical decision, it's an emotional one too. And it's about giving yourself permission to invest in you. In this week's deep dive, I'll be joined by Kamisha Jones-Brandon, founder and executive director of Sister Afia, an organization with a mission to support mental wellness for Black women. Together, we'll explore how to navigate the search for a therapist, what to expect in those early sessions, and how to stay engaged in your healing process. Kamisha joins me on the other side of a short break. Stay with us.
I'm Andy Zopp, the host of Chicago Newsroom 2.0. Every week, we gather for insightful conversations with local journalists and community leaders as we discuss the news of the day and how it impacts the lives of Chicagoans. Join the conversation on CAN-TV Cable Channel 19 or stream live on cantv.org or on the CAN-TV Plus app. Hyperlocal news and critical analysis. Experience the power of community television.
In each episode's deep dive segment, we'll slow things down and take a thoughtful look at a specific issue or challenge with an eye towards reframing how we understand it. It's not just about breaking down the topic, it's about exploring real, actionable ways to shift your perspective, whether that's in your own day-to-day life or in how you relate to someone else's story. The goal is connection and clarity. Taking us deeper today is licensed clinical social worker Kamisha Jones-Brandon. She's the founder and executive director of Sister Afia, an organization focused on making emotional well-being accessible for Black women. Kamisha, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I mentioned a little bit earlier, but I want to maybe start the conversation with just the Black community and like our relationship to therapy. There are real reasons why people have been skeptical about seeking therapy in the past, but that's changing, thank goodness. But what is your in your experience, like over time, what have been the things that you've heard that have made people maybe skeptical or planted seeds of mistrust around therapy?
Well, I think that for a long time, therapy has been associated with the medical industrial complex of the medical system. And so the Black community has a history of distrust with the medical system for good reason, yes. Right? Being experimented on. Yes. We can even think back to slavery with different diagnoses, being attached to wanting to be free. I mean, there hasn't been a great history with psychiatry and mental health in the Black community. But also there's a part around understanding the spectrum of mental health support. And so a lot of times what I've run into growing up, where if you were going to therapy, like, oh, well, you're crazy. Are you okay? Like it would be seen as having maybe an extreme need for mental health care. And so now I think people are starting to open up and understand that mental health care can be beneficial for people who are experiencing mild mental health concerns to those who have been living with mental health conditions for a very long time. So I think that opening up and normalizing that therapy and mental health support can be beneficial for all of us in some form or fashion throughout our lives has greatly, impacted how we're seeing just more Black people just comfortable with talking about going to therapy, comfortable about seeking therapy. Even just 5 years ago, I've seen an improvement. So I'm excited to see where things continue to go for our community.
I appreciate you laying that out. When you said, I don't want people to think I'm crazy, that is still something that I hear, but certainly not as much as I used to. And so, whenever I hear that in my own practice, I'm like, we're not using that word because that's not a helpful framed word, but it does tell me something about maybe what are some of the messages this person's received about mental well-being or mental health care. But yeah, the fact that it's been so associated with the abuses that our community has experienced around health, which has been too bad. What do you think are the reasons behind the shift? You mentioned a better understanding of the range, right? This idea that it's not just for crisis or high acute psychiatric need. It's, it can be arranged. But what else are you seeing as a cultural shift that's allowed our community to access mental health care?
Well, for one, I will say the media. I think there are more representations in shows and in movies with therapists or mental health issues being discussed. There are so many celebrities that have talked about living with mental health concerns, everyone from Beyonce to Missy Elliott to Taraji P. Henson. Right. So you're now seeing a culture of visibility around mental health care from people who you may think they have it all together, they have riches, they have anything that they could have, but they're still experiencing mental health concerns. So I think there's been a shift with visibility in the media. I also think that we're starting to see more people like you and I who represent the Black community who are providing services, even though we still make up such a small percentage of all mental health providers. The fact that people can look at us and know who we are, and that can bring a level of comfort as well. And then also accessibility. Costs is still one of the most significant barriers for people to seek treatment, but you have nonprofit organizations, you have the expansion of the Affordable Care Act, so more people, regardless of their income and background, are able to understand how they can access therapy. So I think all of those things together has been a part of the shift, and also the normalization that it's okay to not be okay, and that being permeated everywhere. Yeah. So it allows Black people to not have to be strong and resilient in the ways that we've been portrayed before, but it allows us to be vulnerable and to kind of take off the shield and the mask and to have a safe, brave space where we can land.
I love that, brave, I think, because it really is brave to sit with somebody and take a look at yourself and take a look at and talk about the things that have happened to you in your life. When people are experiencing challenge, it can be common to think what's wrong with me? But there's this element of there are environmental factors that can impact our well-being, and that's especially so in the Black community, with just health disparities, with disparate access to different things like resources, or just racism and the way people are treated in the workplace and the community. How do you see those kinds of conversations, or how do you bring that awareness to people that yes, these things are happening to you, but the environment is impacting the way you're experiencing the world and yourself?
Yeah, that's a really great point. So with me being a social worker, our background is to look at the person and environment and systems. So automatically, when I'm thinking about how do we improve mental health care access, I'm literally thinking about systems, environment, and what has happened in the person's personal history that contribute to where they are today with their mental health. And I think that having a lens like that helps us to see all of the different things that factor into why someone may have mental health concerns. I think about living on the South Side. I've lived on the South Side the entire time that I've been in Chicago. And, you know, there aren't many mental health clinics, right? So if there's 1 million people that live on the South Side, but there are very few mental health clinics, specifically those owned and operated by Black clinicians, that impacts your ability to access services and your ability to feel like your community has the resources to support you. So that's just one example, but I think having that lens is extremely important, not just for the Black community, but everybody, but particularly given our lived experiences here, it's critical to have that type of lens.
Okay. It makes me think of the saying, it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you.
Exactly.
And so there are so many directions I want to go, but you were talking about the community-rooted organizations that are supporting our mental well-being. And so I just wanted you to share a little bit about kind of what inspired you to create Sister Afia and what kind of services people can get there.
Yeah, so Sister Afia Community Care, I started the organization because I experienced challenges with my mental health in a different season in my life. And when I was seeking help, I would be the only Black woman, you know, in recovery groups, in IOP groups. I mean, all those different parts of your recovery when you've had a mental health crisis. I didn't really see any spaces out there for Black women, period, in Chicago, but especially where I lived on the South Side. I also knew that there were so many of my friends, so many of my community members that were also experiencing the same challenge. We want mental health care. We're in a vulnerable space in our lives. Where can we go to a place that really has a level of cultural understanding and that is focused on the whole person, not just even individual therapy? So I decided to create an organization to respond to the need in the community, but also to fight mental health inequity. That is something that people are starting to talk about equity more now. But when it comes to mental health equity in Chicago, there have been a series of things that have happened that have created, I would say, more exasperated mental health concerns amongst the Black community, but especially Black women. So I believe that community-based care is really, I think people are kind of going away from it a little bit because of the focus on private practice, which is still valuable, but community-based mental health care really helps to catch people and provide a wide range of services that sometimes may not be as available with an individual practitioner.
Yeah, and let's kind of get in the weeds a little bit because you dropped the term IOP, which I think is a really important and helpful resource, but people haven't heard of it. And so it's intensive outpatient program. And then there's also PHP, which is partial hospital program. Oh my gosh, right? I'm like, what is it? So there are lots of different types of therapy. And so maybe we start with the weeds with talking about what kind of services someone can get at Sister Afia.
Yes, so we provide individual therapy, but we also provide clinical case management. So the women that we serve experience multiple barriers to care, which means affordability, misdiagnosis, difficult experiences in the mental health care system. And so clinical case management provides everything from housing, connection to housing, healthcare services, basic needs security, because that is a part of your wellness, which I think more people are really making that correlation, especially with where things are at now with our country.
Yeah.
We also provide peer support. So we have a peer support program called Heal Together, and it's 2 women who have lived experience with a mental health condition that provide brief 30-minute emotional support sessions to other women. And it's a early intervention model, and it's not therapy, but it helps to prevent going longer without care. And for those people who, as we're having this conversation, who are trying to figure out if therapy is a good fit, this is a way to kind of dip your toe in the water. And then also our community events, like we talked about earlier, for our wellness classes, from everything to yoga, African dance, meditation, journaling, retreats. I feel like social events, we've done so many things to support the community connection aspect of mental health. So those are just examples of some of the services that we provide, and then groups as well, therapy groups. We're actually finishing up a group called Thriving Under Pressure. Mariah, one of our therapists, and it's focused on stress management. Huge issue for Black women, burnout and chronic stress. So these are just examples of what we provide. And like I shared, we are really focused on the community holistic support of mental health care for Black women.
That's amazing. What's resonating with me is just people know their therapist. It's like, it's demystifying the people that provide this care. And in my experiences in doing integrated care in a medical center, in an academic medical center like a hospital, people go in for their like a primary care appointment or an OBGYN appointment. And if a mental health condition comes up, sometimes their provider will say, there's a therapist you can talk to, and they can come in and say, you can meet them. And people kind of, when they hear that, they say no. But then when I walk in, or I'm just talking to them because I just want to introduce myself, they go, oh, I'll talk with you, but I didn't want to talk to a therapist. And I get to say, well, I'm a therapist, right? And so it really is the hurdle of just like the unknown, right? And sometimes just putting a face to a profession, and then it doesn't help to just have a person of color, right? In a Black woman kind of in this space to just, again, create some connection. What are your thoughts about that kind of the cultural match, right? Like a Black woman who says, I really want to work with a Black woman. Do you think that people, like a Black woman, could get helped by a therapist who's white? How do you talk to people about when they're really trying to decide for themselves who they should see?
That's a really good question, and I've been asked that before. I think it really is about what the person's expertise is and their skill set and how they can help you. While I think having someone of the same cultural background is important, it's not necessarily a deal breaker. I have worked with providers who were not Black women and was cared for, So I don't want the cultural piece to be a barrier for people, but the most important thing is understanding what are your mental health concerns, what do you need as a part of your healing process, and then also who can help you with that based on those two things. And then also with the cultural piece is making sure that the person who you're working with also is trained in some of the issues that you may be experiencing. Because all Black people, we're not a monolith, right?
True.
We have different levels of expertise, different levels of experience with working with particular issues. I remember one time someone called me and they were like, "You're a therapist, right?" And I was like, "Yes." "Oh, well, I have, obsessive compulsive disorder. Can you help me?" And I said, "Yes, I'm a therapist, but I don't have expertise in that area. Let me refer you to someone else who does." So even though they made the connection that, oh, I'm a Black therapist, there was still an expertise and skill that I didn't necessarily have, that if I would have worked for that with that person, I wouldn't have been able to help them. So that's what I really encourage people to look at. And also, your history, if you've had difficult experiences working with people of other cultural backgrounds, then working with someone who has a similar cultural background can be a sense of safety and comfort throughout your healing journey.
I'm really glad you brought up the point about expertise, because it can feel like finally I found somebody and now they're referring me out. But as therapists, we want to make sure that people are getting the best possible care. And so I often, if there's somebody that I know that provides better care in a particular area for eating disorders, OCD, you mentioned obsessive compulsive disorder, I will refer out to people who specialize in that and who I trust, right? We have our networks that we refer to. And so I think it's important for people to hear that isn't passing a buck. It's making sure that people are getting to the place where they're going to get the best help and the best care.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the point, right? Like we want people to be well, we want people to heal, and we want them to experience that as soon as possible. And sometimes that means making the referral out. And it can be frustrating when you're looking for someone, but it's better in the long term.
So I've decided therapy, I'm ready for therapy. I've done your I've met with your peer-to-peer networks, and I'm like, I'm ready. I found somebody. We have our intake coming up. What are the things that you would encourage people to kind of ready themselves for with, whether they're doing it virtually or in person?
The first thing is to know that usually the first appointment is a review of your clinical history. And what we would call the presenting problem. So what is bringing you into therapy? We've had where some people make the appointment and they're like, oh, I'm just ready to talk about everything. But imagine meeting somebody for the first time. They need to get to know you and you need to get to know them. So I always encourage people to prepare that the issue that you may be coming in with may not get addressed the first session. Particularly, every therapist has their different style, but that's usually pretty standard across the board. Also being able to, if you're able to before the first session, is writing down the different impacts that you're experiencing from changes with your mental health, because that is what's going to help the provider to be able to know how to best support you. What we would call symptoms. So how often are you experiencing sadness? How often are you worried? How is it interrupting your daily life? How has it prevented you from being able to be in relationships? These are just examples, but the more rich information, background information that you provide, that it better equips the therapist to support you with the best approach to support where you're at. And then also know what you need from a therapist. So some therapists are very affirming and validating. And then you have therapists that are challenging, that will challenge you. So kind of knowing, like, personality wise, like what you really need, because having that mismatch can be a challenge as well. And then also, if you're into exploring different therapy approaches, cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance commitment therapy, all those different therapy approaches, just doing some research and just asking questions. Is this something you provide? Can we use some of these interventions? I'm curious. We had a client recently who's experienced trauma, and she was like, I want to try EMDR. She looked it up on her own, and we happened to have a therapist that provided EMDR. She was able to get connected to a therapist, and now she's meeting with her weekly using that therapeutic approach, and she's making progress.
Wonderful.
So it's those are kind of things that you can do on the back end. And then lastly, be patient. Especially with this generation, everybody wants the answer now. I want to feel better now. You will feel better. But like everything, it is a process, and being patient throughout the process and the experience, and being present in the experience, and not always thinking about the destination, right?
Yeah.
So that's something else that I encourage people to do as well, is like, be patient with it.
Be patient. I appreciate that. We could talk about this for so long because I think we just care so deeply and want people to get the best things, but that's the time that we have for today. I'm just so thankful that you joined me, and I know that people are leaving with a better sense of feeling prepared in joining and starting their therapy journey. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
On the other side of a short break, we'll wrap up this week's episode with the closing session. Stay with us.
For more than 40 years, CAN TV has been Chicago's voice, your voice. We've shared your stories, amplified your concerns, and celebrated your triumphs. Now we want to hear from you. What programs matter most? What issues should we cover? How can we better serve your community? Visit cantv.org/feedback today. CAN TV. Experience the power of community television.
I'm so grateful to Kamisha, my friend and colleague, for joining us today. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling hopeful about how many of us are embracing the idea that therapy can be a powerful tool for growth and healing. At the end of every episode, I'll leave you with an invitation, a moment to reflect on something specific. Today, I invite you to think about your relationship with the idea of therapy. What comes up when you consider talking to someone? What messages, whether from your family, community, or culture, has shaped the way you view mental health support? Maybe you're feeling ready, or maybe you're still sitting with questions. Either way, that reflection is a meaningful part of the process. And remember, starting therapy doesn't always mean diving into deep waters right away. Sometimes the first step is just getting curious. So what's one small thing you can do this week to move closer to support? Is it looking up local providers? Asking a friend about their experience? Or maybe just saying out loud, I think I might need help. And if you're a parent, think about how you talk about emotional well-being in your home. Are you modeling what it looks like to care for your mental health? Are you creating space for your children to express their feelings and ask questions? Let's continue working to normalize these conversations and push back against the idea that we have to go it alone. And finally, if you're struggling and need someone to talk to, know that help is available. You are never alone in this. That's our time for this week. If anything resonated with you today, the conversation doesn't have to end here. Join me on our show page for resources and share what resonated with you as you follow along with us through these important conversations. Keep reflecting, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep the dialogue going, whether with us, your friends, or within your own community. That's our time this week. Until we meet again, take care, stay curious, and be well together.